Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for joining us for World Refugee Day here in St. Louis. My name is Carlos Suarez, and I'm the president of the United Nations Association of St. Louis. And thank you again for taking your time out of your afternoon to join us. Just some housekeeping for this afternoon's discussion. You've been muted to enter the conversation so we can allow for a swift conversation from our guest speakers. The agenda for this afternoon is, the conversation will be moderated by Pamela Greer Hibbler, UNA St. Louis board member, and we have special guests Rosie Lang from the International Institute of St. Louis, Director of Social Work, and Stuart Federman, the MBA, Pharmacist and Program Management for FIVDB-USA. They're going to be presenting this afternoon, and we'll allow for questions and answers after they're done speaking. Also, if you want to ask a question, you can ask a question in the chat box, and we'll answer those questions after the presentations are done, and allow for some Q&A at the end of the discussions later this afternoon before 4. So once again, thank you for joining us for World Refugee Day here in St. Louis. My name is Carlos, and I'm the president of the United Nations Association of St. Louis, as mentioned earlier. And the United Nations Association of St. Louis is a local chapter within the United Nations Foundation's system, or within the United Nations Association of the United States of America. Our mission essentially is dedicated to educating, inspiring, and mobilizing Americans to support the principles and vital work of the United Nations and its agencies. So we advocate for the work of the UN and its agencies throughout the year, asking for full funding of the UN through the US's dues for the United Nations. As you can see here in this picture as well, we have the opportunity to go to the UN in New York about once a year for our Global Engagement Summit that takes place. We are a membership-driven organization of advocates that want to support the work of the UN here in the United States. So part of our work is the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Sustainable Development Goals, which are 17 goals to eradicate poverty and help build a more sustainable future for everyone. And so this is a core part of our work in terms of advancing the Sustainable Development Goals here in the St. Louis community and advocating for them. And we'll also be having some events later this year, such as our SDG Summit in August, to talk further about how we can advocate for these goals in the St. Louis region. We've also, the SDGs were adopted in 2015, and it's a 15-year agenda, with 2030 being the end goal. So we have 10 more years to advocate and to help achieve these goals. And everyone, we need your participation in this, and everyone can participate. And this year is a monumental year for the UN. It's the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. And so these conversations and conversations that we're having today and in the future are very important to building the next 75 years of bringing people together in solidarity. So if you haven't seen any of the UN 75 campaign materials out there, it's really about shaping our future together and how everyone can take part in shaping our future. So with this being said, I'm gonna hand it over to Pam Hibbler, UNA St. Louis board member, to continue the conversation for today's World Refugee Day event. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to serve on the board of the St. Louis chapter of the United Nations of St. Louis. Today, we've come together to recognize World Refugee Day. World Refugee Day is observed June 20th each year, and it's dedicated to raise awareness of the situation of refugees throughout the world. And I'm happy to be one of the hosts of this year's program by the UNA STL chapter. As the COVID-19 pandemic spreads across the globe, human rights organizations are warning of the impact the coronavirus will have on the world. And our topic today for World Refugee Day is refugees and the COVID-19. So we're glad to have two dynamic speakers today that are going to enlighten us a little bit more about the impact of this on the refugee community. We're excited to have Stuart Federman first. Stuart is currently a volunteer with the Friends and Village Development USA chapter. Stuart graduated from pharmacy school in 2007 from St. Louis College of Pharmacy and obtained his MBA from Louisiana State University, Shreveport. Stuart works for Bristol Myers Squibb as a medical science liaison in the rheumatology division. Stuart grew up in the suburbs of Chicago and has made St. Louis his home for the last decade. He lives in West County with his wife, Rachel, and they enjoy reading, exploring St. Louis, and hiking. We welcome Stuart. Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela. Let me share my screen and get the presentation up. Can you guys see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, I guess I'll get started. So, hi everybody. Thank you for having me today. My name is Stuart Federman, and I have the enviable task of taking these two very large topics and fitting it into a 15-minute window. We'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. So with that, I'll get started with my topic, refugees and COVID-19. Here's an outline of what I'm going to speak about today. What is a refugee? The global refugee crises, COVID-19 in a refugee setting. I'm going to highlight a couple of non-governmental organizations and then a call to action. I wanted to go through the UN definitions following just the classifications of people. A refugee is someone who has been forced to flee his or her own country because of persecution, war, or violence. A refugee has a well-founded fear of persecution for reasons of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. Most likely, they cannot return home or are afraid to do so. War, ethnic, tribal, and religious violence are the leading causes of refugees fleeing their countries. 2/3 of all refugees worldwide come from just 5 countries: Syria, Afghanistan, South Sudan, Myanmar, and Somalia. An internally displaced person is someone who has been forced to flee their home but never cross an international border. These individuals seek safety anywhere they can find it, in nearby towns, schools, or other settlements. This includes people displaced by internal strife and natural disasters. Unlike refugees, they are not protected by international law or eligible to receive many types of aid because they are legally under the protection of their own government. Countries with some of the largest internally displaced populations are Colombia, Syria, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Somalia. A stateless person is someone who is not a citizen of any country. Citizenship is a legal bond between the government and an individual and allows for certain political, economic, social, and other rights of the individual. A person can become stateless due to a variety of reasons, including sovereign, legal, technical, or administrative decisions or oversights. And this, when people flee their own country and seek sanctuary in another country, they apply for asylum, the right to be recognized as a refugee and receive legal protection and material assistance. An asylum seeker must demonstrate that his or her fear of persecution in his or her own home country is well-founded. The 1951 Refugee Convention is the main international instrument of refugee law. The convention clearly spells out who a refugee is and the kind of legal protection, other assistance, and social rights he or she should receive from the countries who have signed this document. The convention also defines a refugee's obligation to host governments and certain categories or people, such as war criminals, who do not qualify for refugee status. The UN has reported that the number of displaced people worldwide has doubled in the last decade. Announced this Thursday by the UN Refugee Agency, nearly 80 million people, or 1% of all humanity, now qualify as refugees, asylum seekers, or internally displaced persons. 85% of forcibly displaced people worldwide are hosted in developing countries, and about 73% of forcibly displaced people from around the world seek asylum in their neighboring country. According to the Brookings Institute, the Venezuelan refugee crisis is to become the largest and most underfunded in modern history. And if current trends continue, there could be as many as 6.5 million Venezuelans living outside the country by the end of 2020, far outpacing the speed of displacement seen in Syria. I will focus my talk on two countries, Greece, which is the bridge for displaced people into the European Union, and Bangladesh, which has the largest refugee camp in the world. Since 2016, when the European Union signed a controversial deal with Turkey, the Aegean Islands have become a holding area for asylum seekers waiting to have their claims processed. Most of the people are from Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, Palestine, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, and more than 1 in 3 are children. After crossing a narrow stretch of the Aegean Sea from Turkey on small boats, the Moira camp is the largest of 5 island camps. Built for 3,100 refugees, it was supposed to be a short-term holding center for asylum seekers waiting to be transferred to the Greek mainland and elsewhere on the continent. Instead, it has become a bottleneck, with many people staying at Moira for a year or longer. It is now host to over 20,000 people. Doctors Without Borders estimates that the population of the island camps are at 42,000, though its total capacity is 6,000, and has called on the government for the urgent evacuation. Doctors Without Borders stated it would be impossible to contain an outbreak in such a camp setting. To this day, we have not seen a credible emergency plan to protect and treat people living there. Several refugees on mainland Greece have tested positive for coronavirus. For now, the virus has not spread to the refugee camps on any of the islands. The Greek government has extended the lockdown of refugee camps until June 21st to prevent the spread of COVID to these island communities. In August 2017, a deadly crackdown by Myanmar's army burned entire villages to the ground. Families were separated and killed, and women and girls were gang raped. The ethnic minority Rohingya Muslims who escaped Myanmar's army's attack were severely traumatized after witnessing unspeakable atrocities. They found some refuge at the Kutupalong refugee camp, which is situated in Cox's Bazar, just over the border in Bangladesh. The UN has later described this as a textbook example of ethnic cleansing. In January 2020, the UN's top court ordered the Buddhist majority country to take measures to protect members of the Rohingya Muslim community. Myanmar continues to deny its troops carried out ethnic cleansing and genocide. It now says it is ready to take back some of the refugees. But last month, a second attempt to start repatriating Rohingya refugees failed after none of the 3,500 people approved by the Myanmar government to return agreed to do so. They cited the lack of accountability for atrocities committed in 2017 and uncertainty over whether they would get freedom of movement or citizenship. The vast majority reaching Bangladesh are women and children, and more than 40% are under the age of 12. Many others are elderly people requiring additional aid and protection. Since 2017, an estimated 1 million Rohingya refugees have fled to Bangladesh. COVID-19 has made it to these refugee camps. As of Wednesday, there was a total of 38 confirmed COVID-19 cases and 2 related deaths. Refugee camps are temporary facilities built to provide immediate protection and assistance to people who have been forced to flee due to conflict, violence, or persecution. While camps are not intended to provide permanent sustainable solutions, they offer a safe haven for refugees where they receive medical treatment, food, shelter, and other basic services during emergencies. Per the UNHCR, A safe humanitarian space should include the following. It should have a safe distance from the border, no more than a day's walk where possible. It should have easy access to water supplies, safe geographical features, stable ground soil and shaded areas, and waste management capabilities to ensure healthy and comfortable conditions. The layout of the site should also allow for each refugee at least 480 square feet to provide both dignity and mitigate the risk for health crises. 480 square feet equals the size of about a two-car garage. Humanitarian spaces require major logistics and supplies. It therefore needs to be accessible for big vehicles. The conditions in the camps do not allow effective prevention of the spread of the virus. A lockdown as we know it in many Western countries is a luxury that refugees cannot afford. When the first case of COVID-19 was confirmed in Kutupalong over a month ago, an isolation center was built quickly and the camps was provided with testing kits and trained health workers. Since then, care organizations have set up 4 such centers, each with 20 to 25 beds. An extensive awareness campaign about COVID-19 was launched in the camp. Health experts go door to door to tell people about the coronavirus symptoms and how to protect themselves from the virus. The government blocked internet access to the camps to counter misinformation. Other strategies to prevent the spread of COVID are creating hand washing stations in multiple languages, creating a quarantine zone within the remote parts of the camp. They are utilizing PPE kits, the personal protective equipment, donated around the world and help support refugees who want to sew their own masks. And they have limited care workers and other visitors from visiting camps to limit the spread of COVID-19. Let's talk about how close the refugees are living near each other in the camps. Now imagine you have a quarter acre of land or the average size of a suburban home. On the far left, the picture shows the Diamond Princess cruise ship where there are 24 people living on that quarter acre. The virus spread 4 times faster on the ship than it did in Wuhan, China, at the peak of the outbreak there. In Cox's Bazar, Kutupalong camp, there was 40 people living on that quarter acre. And in Lesvos, the Moira camp, there's over 204 people living on the same space. COVID-19 is an emerging, rapidly evolving situation which was declared a pandemic by the WHO on March 11, 2020. The origin of the virus is uncertain, but the genetic analysis shows a similarity to a bat virus that has adapted to humans. The virus has been reported in many countries who perform testing and on all continents except Antarctica. People of advancing age, especially those aged 65 years and older, and those with comorbid health conditions appear more likely to develop the infection and suffer more severe symptoms. Adults aged 20 to 44 account for 20% of the hospitalizations, 12% of the ICU admissions. Children appear less symptomatic with infection and less prone to severe illness. The coronavirus is thought to spread person to person through respiratory droplets produced when an infected person coughs or sneezes. The spread is more likely when people are in close contact with another, which is thought to be about 6 feet. On average, it takes about 5 to 6 days after becoming infected to start to show symptoms. Patients infected with COVID-19 may experience the following symptoms: fever, cough, shortness of breath, muscle pain or fatigue, and loss of taste and smell. Based on clinical symptoms alone, healthcare providers cannot distinguish COVID from other causes of respiratory infections, such as flu or pneumonia. The FDA approved an emergency use authorization for the investigational antiviral drug remdesivir for the treatment of suspected or confirmed COVID-19. While there is limited information known about the safety and effectiveness of using remdesivir, the investigational drug was shown in a clinical trial to shorten the time to recovery in some patients. Hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine was approved for emergency use on March 28th by the FDA. Clinical results have been mixed at best. In late May, the World Health Organization announced it was halting its clinical trials of hydroxychloroquine due to safety concerns. The FDA withdrew the emergency use approval for hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine on this Monday, the 15th. On Tuesday, the 16th, a randomized controlled clinical trial results were announced from the United Kingdom, which found that dexamethasone is able to reduce deaths in certain COVID-19 patients. The pandemic has created unprecedented public and private partnership. Operation Warp Speed has partnered the US government with more than 18 biopharmaceutical companies and other entities to accelerate the development of drug and vaccine candidates for COVID-19. Operation Warp Speed hopes to have a vaccine candidate approved and ready to be used by the general public in January of 2021. The US government has chosen 3 vaccine candidates to fund their phase 3 trials under Operation Warp Speed, which starts the next round of human testing in July. The following general prevention measures have been recommended by countries around the world. Avoid sick individuals. Wash hands with soap and water for 20 seconds before eating, after cough or sneezing, or bathroom visits. Social distancing by keeping at least 6 feet away from other people. Masks are now universally recommended when in public. Stay home if you're ill. Disinfect frequently touched household objects. It is unclear why death rates are highly variable in different regions and countries. Most, but not all, patients recovered from COVID-19 produce neutralizing antibodies, but it is not certain if it is able to prevent a second infection or how long the immunity will last. Current estimates suggest that COVID-19 is about 6 to 10 times worse than the seasonal flu. This is a map that Johns Hopkins University put together, and there is now over 8.7 million cases worldwide as of about an hour ago. Bangladesh currently ranks as the 17th highest country in number of confirmed COVID cases with about 110,000 cases. Non-governmental organizations fill in gaps to provide support to government agencies. I'm going to discuss 3 NGOs who are working with refugees. First, I'm going to discuss the Norwegian NGO, A Drop in the Ocean. Founded in 2015, it has organized more than 6,500 workers to Greece. They distribute food, clothing, and medical supplies to refugees in Greece, the island camps. They teach English and provide classroom material to support bilingual education. Next, I'm going to talk about the FIVDB, or Friends in Village Development Bangladesh. It was an NGO that was established in 1979. FIVDB stepped up to help refugees who have lost almost everything. Their programs are mindful of the psychological trauma and work to destigmatize mental health care. Their public health approach connects peer counselors from the Cox's Bazar community with Rohingya families to address the changing needs of the population shifting from acute emergency to chronic displacement. FIVDB also provides essential training and resources for food security, such as agricultural support and cooking stoves. In 2019, they started a literacy and life skills education program for adolescent girls housed in a newly created women-friendly spaces. There is also a USA chapter, which is based in St. Louis, and it has the same mission, vision, and values of FIVDB. UNHCR, or the UN Refugee Agency, was established in 1950 to provide and coordinate international relief for refugees and displaced people. UNHCR offers them protection and assistance at every stage of their ordeal. In emergencies, UNHCR provides shelter, food, water, and medical care. In established refugee camps and communities, they work to improve refugees' quality of life and future opportunities, providing infrastructure, schools, and income-generating projects. When refugees are able to return home, UNHCR gives them assistance with transport, documentation, and essential items to make transition as smooth as possible. Once they are home, they They provide ongoing support and education to help refugees rebuild their communities and their livelihoods. Today, I want to leave you with this one question. How can you be a global citizen and fight for refugee rights internationally? Pamela will be sharing what the St. Louis chapter of the United Nations Association is doing for refugee rights. Thank you very much for having me today for UN Refugee Day. I wanted to acknowledge a few people. First, I would like to thank Ms. Pamela Greer Hibbler for being a great moderator. The UN Association St. Louis chapter, including Carla Suarez and Les Rooney, and the FIVDB-USA team of Rupa Patel and Kate Kuro. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Stuart. That was very enlightening. And I'm sure we'll have a couple of questions for you at the end of the presentation today. We want to keep moving along with our program today. And now I would like to introduce everyone to Ms. Rosie Lang. Rosie Lang, LCSW, is the Director of Social Work at International Institute of St. Louis. Ms. Lang has 12 years of experience serving international populations. Her early career was focused on anti-trafficking in persons both in the St. Louis and abroad. Since then, she has shifted her attention to bringing a trauma-informed approach to direct service work with foreign-born populations more broadly. She currently leads a team of diverse social service professionals dedicated to providing intensive case management and mental health services to immigrants, refugees, asylees, special immigrant visa holders, and survivors of human trafficking. Additionally, Ms. Lang has experience providing psychotherapy services to support clients with issues ranging from adjustment, resettlement, stress, to sexual assault, to war trauma, among others. So, Ms. Lang, we appreciate you joining us today, and I'll turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you so much. Go ahead and pull up the PowerPoint. Can everyone see that?
Yippers.
First and foremost, I would like to thank you, Pam and Carlos, the United Nations Association of St. Louis. The International Institute is privileged and honored to be speaking with you all today about the importance of recognizing the lived experiences of refugees, particularly as it relates to COVID-19. We're going to switch gears now and focus on our work as a nexus where global meets local. For those of you who do not know much about the International Institute, we are, let's see, we're having some issues here. There we go. We've been around since 1919. So for over 100 years, we have been doing this work, serving foreign-born and welcoming individuals into the St. Louis region. Our vision is as a diverse, inclusive, and thriving community with a mission to build a more connected and productive society to benefit immigrants, their families, and the wider community. So who do we serve? First and foremost, we serve a whole range of foreign-born individuals and their families, really truly without regard to country of origin, race, or religion. We seek to be an inclusive agency. These include refugees, asylees, special immigrant visa holders, and a slew of other immigrants in our region. Additionally, we serve businesses, organizations, and government agencies through consulting services and critical language access services via interpretation and translation. And in addition, we'd be remiss to say, if we did not say that we serve the public as well, building points of connectivity between foreign-born and locally born individuals to really ensure that we are championing ethnic diversity as a regional strength. We do this through a number of ways, one of which I think we're most commonly known for is our Festival of Nations, which in a normal year would be held in Tower Grove Park. We'll be working to bring that onto a virtual platform this year. In terms of our services, many individuals know us as a refugee resettlement agency, and certainly that is a large and significant portion of what we do. However, we do have a number of other services, including English classes, cultural orientation for new arrivals, a slew of employment services, including job training and placement, but not only focusing on that initial first job, but helping our immigrants and refugees build a career through our Career Pathways program. We have a number of micro-lending programs, match savings programs, and the world that I live in, for the most part at the Institute, is within our therapy, social work, and elderly services program, where we provide very much intensive services to support those who are most vulnerable and have the largest amount of barriers facing them in terms of integration and self-sufficiency. And so we work very hard to assist our clients and walk with our clients as we're breaking down those barriers. Where are refugees coming from in St. Louis area? Well, it's really run the gamut in terms of several decades of refugee resettlement. I'm pulling up a visual here that is a little bit older. It looks at data between 1979 and 2015 and really is a good example of how we are seeing right here in our own backyards individuals from quite literally all over the world. Many individuals may know that St. Louis region has a high population of Bosnian immigrants. We also have a large number of Vietnamese who were some of the first to come over after the Refugee Act of 1980. And over the years, we've continued our work with resettlement, welcoming individuals from countries like Somalia, Ethiopia, Afghanistan, Bhutan, Iraq. The list can continue. In most recent years, the largest populations we've seen coming through have been those individuals from Afghanistan and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Thinking about our decades of work with refugee resettlement, it's very important to highlight what is going on right now before we can talk about the impact of COVID-19. So right now, nationally, we have a cap of 18,000 individuals, refugees who are designated as being allowed into the country that is set by presidential determination. 18,000 might sound like a lot or a little, but what we know is that it actually represents a drop in the bucket. 18,000 is an 81% decrease over the past 3 years in the refugee ceiling. And notably, even in St. Louis, if we look back to 2016, when we were sort of at the height of the Syrian bulge coming through, we resettled around 1,200 individuals in the course of a year. Again, a large portion of those individuals being from Syria. The following year, 2017, we saw that drop to 520. The year after, little less than 200, and so on and so forth, until we reached 2020. Locally now, since October 2019, which marked the beginning of our fiscal year, we saw only 116 individuals arriving into St. Louis. And 53% of those individuals were from Afghanistan, with 41% from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and then a very small portion coming from some other countries, including Burma and Ethiopia. And why this number 116 is really important, looking at from October, is that nearly 50 of those 160 individuals came to St. Louis in March, right when things really started to get going in terms of COVID-19 in our region. And if you can imagine what it would be like to come to a new country and then sort of immediately be told there's this massive public health situation happening and there's stay-at-home orders being implemented both in the city and county, you can imagine that it would be significantly traumatizing, given the fact that individuals had come so far to get here and had so much hope. And so when we recognized that there was this pandemic that was upon us, and whenever a community faces a trauma like a pandemic, there are several reactions that can be very normative, right? It's natural to freeze. It's natural to be uncertain what the future may hold. And what we knew as an agency, knowing our clients and knowing our population, we knew that there were a number of new arrivals and individuals who'd maybe been here a little bit longer, but who had significant vulnerabilities still, significant barriers towards self-sufficiency and independence. With that knowledge, we knew that we had to keep moving and move fast, right? And even when you think about crisis response and jumping in, it's also important to have a good understanding of what clients need at the same time, right? So we're not just throwing resources at a problem. And so while the building itself closed, we jumped feet first into crisis response. And to get a better understanding of what our clients were needing, we took a very small sample size within a few of our programs and kind of looked at what individuals' needs were most predominant. So from March of this year, we've been tracking this small sample and trying to get an understanding of where they were impacted the most. In terms of physical health, we had 25 confirmed cases. This was per self-report, and these were individuals, whether they were active clients or identifying family members that they were living with or roommates that they were living with, who had been tested and had a confirmed case of coronavirus. In addition to the physical health impact, we also saw a significant economic impact as well. Within this sample, we saw that 67% had suffered some form of income loss, whether that be through job loss, furlough, reduced hours, or very importantly, a similar loss from family members who were contributing members of the household. And so in addition to the physical health and economic impacts, we also saw that there was a significant emotional health impact as well, certainly, mirroring what many in the community were facing at the time and are continuing to face. We identified that nearly 20% indicated fear or uncertainty about the future and anxiety related to that as one of their top concerns, right? Not just financial. And when we think about that in the context of refugees' lived experiences, that really does make sense. For individuals who perhaps had lived through being under siege in their country and city of origin, having supply chains cut off as a result of war or conflict, having lack of access to very basic needs during a very arduous migration process, or life in the refugee camps, as we just heard about, it can be significantly re-triggering for individuals to hear on the news, hear on the media, resources are running low, you can't go outside of your house, you can't go X, Y, or Z. And of course, even with the stay-at-home orders, we knew that that wasn't quite the case. There was still the ability to go to grocery stores. There was still the ability to have basic needs met. But even to hear or to feel that uncertainty was extraordinarily challenging for our population. And what we learned when thinking about coronavirus in the context of access issues, access to healthcare, access to other basic needs, was that it really highlighted some of the disparities that we knew were already present for our refugee populations accessing healthcare in the United States. So not only was there limited access to testing, which we saw to be true for many in the region, not just refugees, we also saw that there were significant limits to even getting information or making a hotline call to the city or county hotlines or getting access to medical appointments. And what underlies a lot of that is a primary issue with language access. when you come to the United States and maybe do not have a high level of English proficiency right at the start, it can be difficult to reach out to a hotline or doctor's office, even if they offer interpretation, right? Because you have to communicate that you have that need. Perhaps there's a button or options on the phone that you have to press and have to understand what number to press in English, right? Press 2 to be connected to an operator. And that can be really challenging. It can be challenging to understand how long you might have to wait on the phone for an interpreter. There can be disconnections, things of that nature. Additionally, with medical appointments, we saw in the region, as with many other places, a massive move to telehealth services. And navigating that technology for some of our clients was extraordinarily difficult. Not only did they perhaps not have a smartphone in order to do video remote interpretation or video remote health services, perhaps they didn't have enough data to do so. Perhaps there was difficulties understanding the components. I can say, even with this presentation, I had some tech challenges, right? So how difficult might it be for somebody who did not have a high level of English proficiency or computer literacy or tech literacy to do the same in accessing healthcare? And then, of course, similarly, in terms of follow-up, being able to go to the pharmacy to get medications that they need or follow the health directives that their physician laid out. In terms of financial, just very briefly mention, as we noted in our sample, 67% noted some kind of income loss as a result of the COVID-19 outbreak. And that really mirrors what we're seeing on a national level with unemployment numbers in immigrant populations. Migrant Policy Institute just came out recently with a very interesting data analysis in which they looked at the US unemployment rate compared to nativity and gender. And what they found was that immigrant women had the highest rate of unemployment across the board compared to immigrant men and, of course, US-born men and women. And they also found similar numbers related to Latinx populations, interestingly enough, whether or not you were born in the United States. So in April, for immigrant women, we saw an 18% unemployment rate, which is staggering. But what's even more interesting for me to note is that while you see in May, the numbers start to decline for some other groups, including immigrant men and US-born men and women, the unemployment rate for immigrant women stayed largely steady and actually even rose a little. So we know that there is significant impact, not just from a health standpoint, on our population. And so what are we doing, given the fact that we know that there are such stark needs within our community right now? We have chosen at the International Institute to focus really in terms of crisis response on a three-pronged approach. The first of which is basic needs, and it also includes financial assistance and, very importantly, communications. So in terms of basic needs, right off the bat, we knew that individuals, particularly our new arrivals who maybe hadn't ever been to a grocery store yet in the United States, were really going to have some issues related to food, cleaning supplies, and things of that nature in order to make sure that they were safe. And so we coordinated deliveries with all of our new arrivals since October, in addition to many of our other clients who might have continued vulnerabilities, such as the elderly or immunocompromised. And we delivered things like hand sanitizer, toilet paper, food grocery cards, cloth masks, anything that we could think of that we could get our hands on. And we were trying very hard to resource these things, I should mention, in a time where the rest of the community was also scrambling to resource these things as well. We also focused attention on building up donations so that we could then put it into financial assistance down the road, and then of course access to care. So really, again, even though our building was closed, we were out in the community, we were on the phone with our clients, ensuring that they were able to set up that telehealth appointment and understand how to use it, right? How to get tested if they suspected that they might have symptoms of COVID-19. And so very active ensuring that to the extent possible, individuals who are most vulnerable did not fall through the cracks. Through the support of a number of very generous donors, we have also been able to support clients through rental and utility assistance. We've gotten support through one of our primary funding organizations, U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants, along with the United Way of Greater St. Louis and the St. Louis City Mental Health Board, in order to provide these things for individuals to ensure that food access and basic needs were continued to be received. And importantly, also, we jumped in with unemployment claim assistance for individuals who were eligible for that. And as you can imagine, again, with maybe limited knowledge on how to use a website or limited English proficiency, navigating those unemployment claim websites, that is very, very challenging and something that needed to be done on a weekly basis. And so we were right there with our clients, trying to ensure that they got everything to which they were eligible. And finally, and very importantly, we also felt the need to focus on communications. And we did this through a number of ways. Again, you know, in St. Louis, we do have a wonderful international community here, but it's not as common to find information in native language other than perhaps Spanish in some circumstances. So we immediately started collating as many resources we could in native language for our client populations. We were posting them on the website, and we recognized that that was not going to be enough because of literacy issues, because of access issues. And so what we did then was we started pushing out broadcast calls, or robocalls, if you will, in native language. And we've done those in around 7 to 9 languages per call to over 800 individuals who, again, are refugees, asylees, special immigrant visa holders, anyone on our client list. And those robocalls included information on what is coronavirus, what are the symptoms of COVID-19, how do you keep yourself safe? So we had a call that really went into, you know, proper hygiene with hand washing, right? Washing your hands for 20 seconds or more. How to physically distance, what does that even mean? Why is it important, especially for some of our communities that are very communal? We included information on the stay-at-home orders. What does it mean and what doesn't it mean? It doesn't mean that you're locked in your house and can't leave. It doesn't mean that there isn't going to be food, you know. So we had to really clarify these things to mitigate some of the fear that was going on. We even put out calls recently related to some of the curfews that were in effect. And of course, importantly, resources that we found out, including St. Louis Public Schools pandemic food program and things of that nature, to ensure that folks were getting as connected to as many resources as they could during this outbreak. And so not only did we do the calls, but we also posted those on our website as well to ensure that as many individuals could have access as possible. And so really quickly, you know, we talk about what we've been doing, but it's really important to also talk about what you can do. And as Stuart mentioned earlier, you know, this is a call to action. These are the times that really test who we are as human beings. And it's important for everyone on this call to recognize that there is something that you can do to support refugees during this time, whether it be through donations to support financial assistance for refugees, or even if it's about supporting a refugee-owned business, perhaps, that might be impacted. There are a number of our clients who own restaurants or catering services, things of that nature, so supporting them. And then importantly, correcting any rhetoric that you might be hearing that might be anti-immigrant or anti-refugee. I think it's really important that we don't lose sight of the fact that that is still happening in our community. And so this is the time where you can decide how you want to show up for your fellow human beings, and how you want to show up for your community. And with that, I think my time is finished. I want to thank Carlos and Pam again, and I believe there's going to be a question and answer period coming up. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you again, Rosie. That was a very great presentation, and it really gave a local spin to how we can impact and help out our local refugees in the community. Carlos, I don't know if we need to let some people in that have been waiting to get in the presentation, possibly before we move to the Q&A.
Yeah, we'll see what we can do, but if anybody, we can start the conversation now. So
Okay.
anybody who has questions, or I know there's been some questions asked in the chat that we can address as well.
Yes, Stuart and Rosie, I would like for you all to look at the chat. There are a couple of questions already that kind of are personalized to your respective organizations. If you could take a look at those and see if you could address those. And then we want to invite all of our guests today. Again, thank you for taking your afternoon and spending it with us in celebration of World Refugee Day and this important conversation on COVID-19 and its impact on our refugee community, global and locally, and how we can support it. So we want to invite everybody for the time that we do have left. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or if you want to join with your video, you're welcome to do that at this time also. Well, I know I had a few questions that I noticed from, and this is kind of directed at for Stuart and Rosie's organizations about social distancing, I guess for maybe more so kind of with the refugee camps that Stuart talked about. If you could elaborate a little bit more on how, if at all, they're able to do any type of social distancing with some of the numbers that you gave us. It seems like that may really be challenging.
Yes, thanks, Pamela, for the question. Unfortunately, with the camps and the amount of people that end up being in the camps is way more than is planned. And unfortunately, the space that is available for the camp is just not large enough to allow people to have at least 6 feet from other people, or at least family structures. So, you know, that's why it's so important to try to prevent infections from coming into the camps just because there's no way to be able to prevent infections once it starts going through the camp. It looks like there's a question of how did the May cyclone affect the Cox's Bazar refugee camp? And so on May 18th, Cyclone Amphan, has been the strongest cyclone in the area since 2007, landed and hit Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, and Bhutan. Luckily for the Cox's Bazar and the refugee camp, the Kutupalong camp, the cyclone curved and missed hitting it directly as predicted by the models. The models had it hitting the camp directly. So the camps only received a lot of rain, which caused a lot of mud to be in the camps, which just kind of made moving around more difficult. But India was hit pretty hard by the cyclone. It caused over $13 billion in US dollars in damage, and there's about 130
Wow.
Stuart, thanks for providing some input. This is Rupa. I'm a volunteer with Stuart. I just wanted to also bring into the conversation that we didn't talk about climate change and refugees, given the COVID pandemic, but when refugee camps that are situated,
That's who we went with.
refugee camps that are situated in these areas near water or Bay of Bengal or tropical areas. I want to remind the audience today, and thanks for listening, about there's all this re-trauma. So every March, most camps have to equip themselves for a cyclone or monsoon in these tropical areas. And with Cyclone Amphan, what happens is there are a lot of people that have been displaced within the camps, and that is in itself is traumatizing. So it's layers of trauma that happen. And I want to paint a picture that when they move people around in the camps to not be in a target way of a cyclone, or to be in a better shelter that's reinforced and not kind of on a muddy slide of a hill, this causes separation of families, which can then lead to all kinds of other issues such as trafficking, sexual violence, again, more trauma. So that was a great question for Cyclone Amphan, and I also wanted to use that as a prop for also what happens with climate change and changes in weather within these dense camps. And COVID-19 is going to do the same thing. It's going to the organizers will try to create social distancing, which will be the movement of families from their communities within that camp, or even families in itself. There could be loss of communication within the camp, which is causing a whole host of issues. So thank you.
Thank you.
There's another question. Do you have any thoughts of the efficacy of the steroid treatment you mentioned that was recently announced from Oxford? And is it a reasonable potential treatment in refugee camps if an outbreak were to occur? And so I'd like to just kind of take a step back on this. And we have not yet seen the data from this study. We just had a top analysis that was done. But this was a randomized controlled trial, which is better than a lot of the other trials that we had seen before, where we were seeing with the hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine, and even remdesivir. We really didn't have the data available to see. And so while it's promising, it's really only in severe cases. So patients that are on oxygen therapy and patients who are on ventilators, there was a benefit that was shown.
No, baby, you just had some juice.
This was the first drug that actually showed benefit in reducing the death rate. So yes, it's promising, and the medication itself is super cheap, but we need to try to limit the amount of cases that go into the refugee camps. And then for the severe patients, if everything goes as planned, then they would be using this medication later.
And one of the I want to add on to Stuart's, one of the call to actions for everybody is the equitable
You did a
access
great job explaining.
to
I knew
any
he'd know. I gave him
medications.
what I thought would be a softball question for him and make it look like he's
And
really,
so-
really sharp. And he covered everything perfectly.
Can we have everyone mute? I'm sorry, I think some people are not on mute. We can hear the side conversations. But the call to action would be to have equitable access to ventilators, higher levels of care for what we need for COVID, and then very importantly, if these new studies come out, equitable access to that drug. The drug remdesivir that had been coming out, there was already a shortage. It's very expensive. It was even questionable if anyone outside of certain high-income countries would have access to that. So just another way to have a call to action.
And we had a couple of questions. Thank you, Rupa. I think directed a little bit more of the local spin for you, Rosie. One was, if with the International Institute currently being closed, I think the building, how can people help right now? You alluded, I think, a little bit, but we had a few people, I think, that came into the program late. If you could talk about how they can help a little bit more. And then we have another question about how we can help, I guess if there is help right now with the refugees understanding the political interplay that's going on in the world right now. And I guess this could be for Stuart and Rosie via the Black Lives Matter they're asking, since we have a lot of refugees that fall into that Black refugees as well.
Both are great questions. First, very briefly, in terms of volunteering, right now, because the building is closed to visitors and all of our work is really done remotely, there's a little bit more limited opportunities for volunteering, but I'd encourage you to still get in touch with our volunteer coordinator, Carrie Bricky. Her information is on our website to learn about what opportunities we currently have. But of course, a good way to help right now is through an in-kind donation or a cash donation, if that's possible, to support financial assistance to refugees, and all that information's on our website. Switching gears and talking about helping refugees understand what's going on related to the Black Lives Matter movement is a really critical and important question, so I thank you for asking. It's going to be a long road, I think. A lot of our work with our clients has been historically to kind of explain social dynamics, explain cultural dynamics that are happening in the communities that they are very new in. But I think that work has a long way to go in terms of helping individuals understand Black Americans' lived experiences and history of violence and oppression that has been placed upon them. So one of the things that we did recently, not only did we put out a call related to the curfew that was in place for a short time, we also put out a call explaining why the curfew was in place, what led to it. We've provided information on the history of protest in the United States and how that often goes to hopefully making the country a better place. But these are not things that can happen in a one-time conversation or a short call. So the International Institute has really committed ourselves to not only conducting listening sessions within our staff, within the community, and within refugee and immigrant communities, but also to further actions. And we're currently developing action planning, including utilizing content that's being developed right now through CORE to implement with our cultural orientation for all new refugees that are coming in on these racial tensions and history of oppression in the United States. But it's a great question because while certainly our clients who maybe have higher levels of melanin in their skin, they have not had the same experiences and the same history that Black Americans have had in this country. But from the minute they step off the plane into our country, they are still subject to the same systems that we have in place here. And so it's going to be very important for us moving forward to continue to work to address the systemic racism. You know, our vision is a diverse, inclusive, thriving community, and that can't happen until we address these issues.
Thank you. We have another question for you, Rosie. We're wanting to know a little bit more about the William K.Y. Tayo Family Refugee Resettlement Fund, if you could speak on that.
Sure. The TAO fund is in place to be a direct line, essentially, to assist individuals at the most basic level. So if you donate, there are a number of options to donate on our website. If you donate to the TAO fund, those funds are set aside to directly benefit new refugee arrivals. And so if you're really interested in having your money go directly to benefit a family or an individual who's more recently arrived, that's where we suggest you make the donation.
So right now we would ask for any final questions if we've missed any in the chat or anybody else would like to speak before we conclude. We ask for you to address your questions now. Okay. Okay. Was there anything else, Stuart or Rosie, that you guys wanted to say before we conclude the program? We we do thank you for your time today and for the enlightening words that you've shared on this subject.
I would just like to thank you guys for having me. I'm definitely more than happy to have side conversations or share any of the information I had in the slides, and to talk to people about how to get more involved with the with FIVDB or some of the other organizations. So, you know, if you reach out to Carlos or Pamela, I'm sure they would be able to share my contact information for more information. Thank you very much.
Rosie, did you have anything else you wanted to share with us?
No, thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you both. And we thank everyone for joining us today. If you put your attention on the screen, we have the call to action web link of how you can continue to help and support with refugees. And again, if you need any additional information on the presentations today, you can reach out to myself or any United Nations of St. Louis board member, and we'd be happy to put you in contact with Stuart or Rosie. And we thank you for joining the event today.
Thank you, all of you.
Thank you.